So, Marty, you talk in your documentary about the club. What is the club?
The club is effectively a group of bankers, mostly money center bankers, investment bankers. They're not the typical local regional type banker. Goldman Sachs doesn't have branches that takes money from widows and orphans. It's a trading operation.
What is your problem? What's your grievance with the club?
Largely, I think that primarily that they have changed the entire role of banking. Before, it was relationship banking, where if I gave you a loan, it was between us. Your loan stayed on my books. I'd make sure you were okay, whatever. And what's transpired is that they've evolved it into transactional banking. Whereas I don't care anything about you. If I can get you to do something, then I sell it to somebody else. So they're securitizing it. And then they send these things around and they blow up like Iceland and many other countries. It's just transactional. It's how much money can I make on this deal, that's it. They don't care about the ramifications of it.
So why didn't you want to belong to this club who did very well for themselves?
Because largely money's, you get to a point you can't spend it. I mean, if you really, it sounds, great. All right, if you got $1 billion. It's not really going to change your lifestyle. If you bought the most expensive house in the country, like $150 million, and then you filled it with all kinds of art and stuff like that, so let's say you spend another $200 million. What are you going to do with the rest of it? It's more for monopoly. It's more for playing, investing, and gambling back and forth. It's not going to change your lifestyle.
Let's talk about your jail time. How did you manage to survive all those years in jail?
Well, I think that largely what you see in the movies tends to be what we over here we call state prison. Okay, there you're in with murderers, rapists, things of this nature. That's a state crime. In the United States, we have federal and state. So I was charged federally, not in the state. And in feds, you get basically mafia, white collar, a lot of politicians, lawyers, or high drug dealers. Importing things in and out of the country. You don't get the local guy that killed his wife and stuff like that. So it's a completely different atmosphere.
But what all those years that you were held in contempt, how was life there?
I found it actually interesting. It was in a unit of 96 people, and you see actually Adam Smith working live. One guy would set up a little business. He would do sewing if he needed something sewed. Somebody else, everybody had something different. I basically ran the law library for people. They needed a letter to be sentenced or something like that, or I would review their case for them. So everybody had their own little specialty, and I at least had some training in law, so I was not floundering. I knew what I was doing with, and so to me it was more of a challenge.
Did you ever doubt yourself? Did you ever have doubt about your real innocence while you were in jail?
No, in fact, I had a meeting with them. I had a meeting with the government. They tried to get me to plead guilty to a conspiracy. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. I'm not involved with Safra and this Russian stuff. That I'm not going to do it. And they clearly said right. They said, look, well, we know you didn't steal any money. Well, no, of course not. You have a bank that pleads guilty, pays everybody back. That's their deal. They don't go to jail as long as everybody's made whole. So why am I held in prison for another 5 years to turn over money for who? For nobody. And at the end they go, oh, okay, fine, you don't know anything. So the problem is the American press just takes whatever the government says, oh my God, look at that. That's it. Nobody looks into this a little bit. Just pick up the rug and just look at the allegations that they make so many times, because they assume that people will just believe whatever the government says.
Did it change you?
Yes. It maybe, I would say, built maybe more character. I would confess that before, I didn't think that the legal system was that bad. My initial lawyer that they chased out, Richard Altman, when he heard it was charged in New York, he said to me, he said, oh my God. I said, what's the problem? He says, you don't understand. They practice law differently in New York. I thought the law was the law. And when I get up there, I mean, the judge is changing transcripts. The whole thing was just, they can do whatever they want. And so when they went after the lawyers to take all their money away, then Richard stood up and he says, fine, this isn't about money. I'll represent him for free. And then the judge turns to the government and says, oh, maybe he's his consigliere. Oh, yes, Your Honor, we're investigating him. No, now you can't be my lawyer if you're also being investigated. So they chased everybody out that they possibly could. So their problem was that I knew the law, so I could stand up and go toe-to-toe against them.
Let's talk about the Armstrong Code.
Mm-hmm.
In 3 sentences or so, can you explain what is the Armstrong Code?
There have been many people that have seen the business cycle. I think the difference has been that they looked at it from a domestic perspective. You have Kondratiev, Russian. I mean, even Paul Volcker put out a book in 1978. He called it Rediscovery of the Business Cycle. He said it was about 8 years. I basically just began with a list of international panics, not just American. And that yielded this 8.6-year business cycle. And then to see it, it's interesting because it affects the entire world, and capital rushes around. I mean, so I lived through it. I was doing a lot of business in Geneva with OPEC in the early 80s, and all the top brokers I knew at Merle and all the brokerage houses there, they moved, and then they were all in Tokyo. So the talent moved with the money. So I began to see how international capital flows actually perform. So I think that, and now it's been interesting. I hired a CEO to run our company, Ashley Warren. He's British. He was a client, first saw me at a seminar in Tokyo. A few other people are coming in. They're all former clients. They've all been running dealing desks for banks or whatever, and they all say the same thing. They're glad to kind of get out of the banking system. I mean, we're all in the same age category, so we kind of felt that we should maybe call ourselves the over-the-hill crowd, but they all have the same thing. They said, Ashley said it's just nice to be able to say what's actually happening for once.
So can we make it just clear on? Go ahead.
Don't you change the leveling field with your prediction? Does it somewhat become a self-fulfilling prophecy, maybe even?
No, largely because it's kind of like life itself. When we're born, we're still learning things, and then it's largely when you get experience. At the end, you finally understand how to trade and what to do. So you always have that process within the cycle. And by the time we gather all the knowledge that okay, this is how it really works, it's time to die.
You talk about the geometry of time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain this?
Time is it really is the fourth dimension. It is, Einstein was correct in that it's not absolutely definitive. It does flow. And it is simply once you understand to be able to see that everything in the universe functions on a cycle. That is how it's maybe called the divine formula, whatever. The planets revolve. We have night and day. Your heart beats. There isn't anything without a cycle. When spring comes, you feel good. You want to go out and buy something or clean up the yard and buy some flowers or something. Wintertime, you hunker down. Hospitals have reported that if they paint their rooms dark, it takes someone longer to recover than if they're in a room that's very bright and cheerful. We are cyclical creatures. Our brain waves are cycles. So, I think our problem in the West compared to the East, we think in a straight line. That's our real downfall. You go to Asia, I have no problem with cycles. Everybody goes, yeah, of course it is. What are you talking about? That's part of their religion, everything. The West, we always want to reduce it down to this caused that, and it's not that way. It's maybe it's a combination of things. It's not just one thing. It suits our politicians because if a crash happens, they want to blame somebody. Well, who are they going to blame? They always start an investigation and go after somebody locally. It may have come from the outside. Iceland's problem was the fact that the bankers were sold products that blew up from New York. You can't pass a law, to understand everything. It's very interesting, process. But we're all connected, and there's no getting away from it.
It's also a bit metaphysical, almost transcendental. Are we governed by a higher entity?
Oh, I don't know. That gets into religion per se, but the entire universe, everything has a cycle to it. And I mean, it's just a different way of thinking. That I think we need to recoup. I don't know why we're in the West so linear in that context. Everyone acknowledges there's a business cycle, but they kind of say, "Oh, yeah, but you can't define it." Why? You're not measuring it. You're not trying. But we want to believe in, like Santa Claus, that government can create perpetual growth, 3% every year forever, without it ever going down. That was Marx's idea. If we take all the toys away from everybody, create perfect communism, then we'll eliminate the business cycle. Well, the politicians were corrupt. I mean, you can't, it's human nature. We can't eliminate it, and many people have tried.
Did you at times make forecasts that went totally wrong?
No, not really, because everything's connected. You can make a wrong forecast if you're looking at just a single item, because something else is coming in from the outside that you didn't pay attention to. So, in order to see everything develop, you have to realize it's all interconnected in its capital flows. So, it's everything has a reason, and it's like a domino. It falls and hits the next one and the next one and pushes. So if you get the first one right, it's hard to be wrong on everything else. And I mean, you can look on our website. I mean, 2011. Even Barron's covered it. They said, okay, fine. We said stock markets are low. We're going to make new highs. At the same time, gold's peaked out. That's it. In order for that to happen, both have to happen in unison. You can't have the stock market going to new highs and gold keep going. I mean, it's a balance. It's like a play.
We experience a lot of international turmoil and conflict. Are these the results of international financial systems?
It's, yes, I would say you can go online and read Herbert Hoover's memoirs. They're free at his library, 1931. All the history books that we learned in school about the Great Depression are all propaganda. None of them told the truth. They wanted to sell a socialistic agenda and blame corporations, etc. When I read Herbert Hoover's memoirs, my eyes were just completely wide open. He has in there all the documentation from heads of state back and forth. The first sovereign default began in Austria, and then it spread to Germany. Banks were falling, and eventually all of Europe defaulted on its debts. Britain was forced into a moratorium. Eventually came out of it. They suspended all interest payments, everything. And Herbert Hoover, in his memoirs, is documenting this capital flow rushing around as governments are going into chaos. And it explains exactly what happened with Greece. He said, capital moved like a loose cannon on the deck of a ship in the middle of a hurricane. He says it was firing off in every which direction so fast they couldn't form a committee quick enough to figure out what was happening. Greece, I can tell you, when Greece fell, what did the traders do? They look around, oh, okay, fine, made a bunch of money on that. Who's next? Oh, look at Portugal. Oh, look at Spain. Oh, then they start moving. This is the way capital functions. So I may be one of the few people from a trading environment that's speaking out. More are going to be coming because we're getting in the age of retirement. So this is the way capital moves. On a dealing desk, you look, okay, fine, what's next? Because it's all connected. A good trader knows that. I can tell you, honestly, when they were forming the euro, they came to us, they took the whole back row in our London conference that year, and the Bundesbank was against the euro. They used to basically leak information to us because they knew all the institutions read us. And they were against it, knew it wouldn't work. I met with them and told them it wouldn't work. At that point in time, it was very clear. If you wanted a currency to compete against the dollar, what do you need? You need a single debt market. Institution, major, insurance company may have a few $100 billion. They want to park it someplace. Okay? If you don't have a national debt for Europe, there's no place to do it. Now you have to look at each country. And each country has a different credit rating. Who do you trust? Who you don't trust? This is why the bunds are going crazy. It's capital rushing away from other places, and I can tell you what the traders expect. Germany's been benefiting with the capital inflows that way, with the DAX, etc. Why? Because it's a bet against the euro. The common thing that they will tell me, hey, if the euro fails, I got German stuff, I'll end up with Deutschmarks.
You kind of compare the debt of countries to a huge Ponzi scheme. Why?
Largely because it's astonishing, honestly. But what's evolved since World War II is they borrow year after year with no intention of paying anything back. And why do we borrow and pay interest? It used to be the theory that debt, it was less inflationary to borrow than to print. Why? Because before 1971, if I had a stack of government bonds, and I said I went to the bank and I wanted to borrow, I said, okay, fine, I want to borrow to buy a house or something. It was illegal. They could not lend on government bonds. After 71, if you went trade markets, you put your money in T-bills and use as collateral. So now government debt's just become money that pays interest. That's it. There's no distinction between the two. So honestly, it makes no sense. We should just be printing. If you can look, almost at times 70% of the national debt of Germany as well as the United States has been the cumulative interest rates. This didn't go to help build schools or children or anything else. Went to the bankers.
So why should the taxpayers pay for it?
That's my argument is honestly that we don't need this. We did a solutions conference, how to get out of this. It's going to have to be a debt to equity type swap. Kind of like, Greece is selling off assets to Russia. We just have to recognize that this system doesn't work, and it's not going to perpetually keep going. Your tax burden keeps rising and rising and rising, and it's great the politicians say, oh, the rich don't pay their fair share. Okay. Raising taxes on the rich, does it ever lower anybody else's taxes? No, it just puts more money in their pocket. That's it. I was down in Australia, and they sold the luxury tax. Sounded great. Had a slogan of, we're going to tax their Ferraris, their fur coats, and their French wines. And everybody cheered. Yeah, go get them. Well, they passed it. What was in it? All electrical products. So, look, that's the way it is. They're always going to tax more and more and more. It's the same thinking process. So even Einstein said you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking process.
Now, how do you solve the Greece problem right now?
Honestly, I would have to look at doing a whole debt to equity swap and bring this out. It's got to stop. You keep giving them more and more money and then expecting them to pay back. Greece just today now ordered all its departments within the government to send its cash back to the central bank because it's broke and it's trying to make the IMF loans. You're going to have civil war. You can't do this to people. This is crazy. This is totally crazy. The people have paid twice as much and have paid dearly, and whose mistakes are these? It's not the people, it's the politicians.
You predict a major sovereignty debt big bang for later this year. What will happen, and how can we prevent it from happening?
There's no prevention because, yes, in theory, you can stand up and say, okay, this is going to happen, let's change the system. But nobody's going to change it until they actually see it. That's human nature. So Big Bang is largely every government's in trouble. You'll probably have a Labour government coming in Britain, and what's their slogan? Oh, forget the austerity, let's start, let's restore all the payments. Britain has the highest debt per capita in Europe. I mean, it's like there's no end. But that raises taxes. It's not very, there's no solution out of this.
What will the Big Bang look like?
Largely the same thing. I mean, you're seeing it in Greece. I mean, eventually you're going to be forced to default. Once that happens, I'll tell you, the traders will start looking around who's next. Then I strongly recommend reading Herbert Hoover because that's exactly what happened. One country after the next was forced into default. And then you're talking about wiping out pension funds. You have, even in Switzerland, by law, a lot of pension funds have to have more than 80% government bonds. 80%. I mean, you're talking about wiping out people's futures here. So that's what I'm arguing. Look, we need a solution because this is not working.
Why did you participate in this documentary? Are you on a mission?
This system is just, it's going to really implode. And I have children and grandchildren. I mean, it's not for me. I'm fine. I can go hide on the beach someplace at this point. But what are we leaving behind?
Do you see a connection between the sovereign debt crisis, the economic crisis, and the war?
Unfortunately, yes. We have all this in our computer, and we've correlated them, and you don't get war unless the economy turns down. People are not willing to fight if they're fat and happy. Take something away from them, then what? Then you get the civil unrest, you get war, you get things of this nature only when the economy turns down. If the economy's booming, nobody wants to do anything. Why? Everybody's happy. If you suddenly lose your pension and they go, oh, well, it's not me, it's that guy over there. This was the mistake that Obama made with Putin. Very openly trying to put in sanctions, etc. Stupid, completely stupid, because the people he thought the idea would be that they would rise up and overthrow Putin. No, not going to happen. Not when you and everybody knows you're the cause of it. If you're the cause of it, all he has to stand up and say, this is what they're doing to us now. So the people are going to rally behind him against the external enemy. This is how wars are created. You have to be very careful. I mean, but it's always the same. It's like I said, it's a Shakespeare's play. It's always the same result that you get, just the actors change.